when it comes to supplementation and what's claims have been made, and perhaps some contamination and some other things that have led to athletes failing drug tests when otherwise they didn't mean to, and some other sketchy things. Now, when we're looking at nutritional supplement research, it's really important that we always keep in mind the context of the research. So certain supplements are really useful in very specific populations, meaning really freaking old people or people that have some type of chronic disease or ailment. These supplements don't seem to have the same effects when we're actually looking at healthy people. Most of the supplements for like testosterone boosting and otherwise, they've been shown to work not very frequently. And when they do, they're working in older individuals that happen to already be low testosterone, or they're working in animals. And it turns out we're looking for effects in humans. Now, training status is another big component, because we'll get people that are recreationally trained, but you don't get a lot of hard trained or really like elite level individuals in a lot of these studies, which once again can be pretty misleading, because when you're working with effectively a beginner, everything works. So we want to make sure that we're doing things appropriately when we're looking at it, that, you know, are these people, is their training status appropriate for your level? Now, when we say comparison to, as in when we're looking at the effects of, say, some type of protein shake, okay, are we comparing this protein shake to water, which is really going to mean more of, does giving people calories after exercise actually help improve recovery compared to nothing? How many of you guys have come across or heard about some of the arguments that like chocolate milk is the best post-workout nutrition ever? Any you guys ever come across that type of logic before? Yeah, that's full of crap. If you're lactose intolerant, congratulations, makes you pass gas, frightens all your friends away. But more importantly, a lot of that research was comparing it to orange juice. So protein and sugar is better than just sugar. Ta-da! Or protein and sugar compared to water, protein and sugar is better. You know, it's a cheap thing to go ahead and put calories in somebody, but that's by no means the best form of supplementation. They just are really good at marketing. And that's unfortunately what a lot of it comes down to, is supplementation, because it turns out you don't get the same type of marketing from eating more broccoli or getting more sleep. Now, randomization means obviously people got, one group got the supplement, the other group didn't, and they kind of had a different order. Crossover design is great because that means they've got both the supplement that they're interested in and the placebo, so they can see how they reacted to each of them. And then is there more than one study? If there's only one study that's showing this effect, the basics of statistics is it's a frequentist approach, meaning we're effectively looking at stats to figure out what's the chance that the differences between these groups occurred because there is a change, and what's the chance that it was just pure luck. And effectively, when we say that a p-value is set at 0.05, what does it mean percentage-wise that you would find that result on accident? 1 in 20, absolutely, Kristen. Or you could just say 5%. Now, here's the thing. If that's only happened once, and there were 20 different research groups that all did very similar studies, well, the one that found the significant result is probably the one that's going to get published, which in turn, if the other guys never try to publish it because it turns out they didn't have significance, then congratulations. People think this supplement works because they don't see any other research on the other side disagreeing with those statements. Does that make sense to you guys? And then, of course, peer review, which then it's actually had to go through some type of academic rigor, and it's not bros on the interwebs telling you that these supplements work, which is funny because most of the stuff that pro bodybuilders sell are not the supplements that really help them put on that muscle mass. Those are the illegal ones, which we are not going to really spend any time talking about. So any questions, comments, concerns about just kind of how we can take a look at supplements initially and kind of be critical of their efficacy and safety? So we have this giant table of all of these different options as far as, you know, what has been debatedly can happen for some of these things. Yeah. There's a lot here. We're going to kind of mosey through it pretty fast because I'm just going to focus on the ones that really work. If you guys have questions, please just unmute yourself, ask the question, or go ahead and put it up in the chat. But otherwise, we're going to kind of move with a little bit of speed. So carnitine we've talked about before. Remember, that's how we're going to be able to get fatty acids into the mitochondria. Supplementation of it as far as to increase performance, not so much. Creatine is really useful. And what's interesting, guys, is notice the amount of creatine per 100 grams. So if you were to eat effectively what ends up being about a pound, it's probably closer to 2 pounds of tuna, beef, or pork a day, you're effectively close to being on creatine, given the amount that you're naturally getting from eating it. So the folks that are going to get the biggest effects from eating creatine are actually going to be typically your vegetarians and vegans, simply because they don't really get it in their diet. Your liver produces it, but nowhere near to the level which you can max it out inside of your body. Glycerol is a potentially useful methodology to effectively allow for hyperhydration pre-competition. So you're going to be able to effectively avoid dehydration a little bit more. This is something you could play with if you're ever interested to try, but this is noticed for really, really long distance stuff. So if you're going to go do Ironman, a marathon, ultra marathon, you might want to look into this strategy a little bit. Now, androstenedione, which was essentially a precursor to testosterone, it kind of worked a little bit, but it's not legal anymore. And there's a lot more pro hormones out there that they work, but they don't work very well, and they've got a lot of side effects. The original pro hormones that were legal, like 1-AD, Superdrol, Masterdrol, those were legal back whenever I was your guys' age. Those, on the other hand, happen to have positive effects on changing lean mass and otherwise, but they're harsh on the liver. And of course, they also have other side effects because it's essentially they get converted into anabolic steroids inside of your body. Yeah, bee pollen's hilarious. Some people supplement with it, might help with overall health, not really. Chrysin is essentially it's a component of bee pollen extract that in theory is supposed to be anti-estrogen. I haven't really seen enough to argue that it's really that good. Beta-alanine is pretty useful. Beta-alanine is the limiting factor in order to make carnosine. The other component to make carnosine is the amino acid histidine. And so by taking beta-alanine, you can actually increase your intramuscular carnosine levels. When you do this, now you're going to actually do a better job of keeping your pH higher when you're doing anaerobic work. And so it's going to allow you to do a little bit more work in that session. This is like creatine, where you need to take it chronically in order to have an effect. A lot of these other supplements, it's kind of you take it only when you need it as kind of a one-off, like caffeine. But the problem is if you take too much at once, you get what's known as paresthesia, and that essentially is kind of a pins and needles sensation across your face. It's not super pleasant. HMB, beta-hydroxy, beta-methylbutyrate, is literally essentially metabolite of leucine. You guys have probably also seen alpha keto isocaproate, KIC. There's also HICA, which is another leucine metabolite. It's been pretty useful with improving lean body mass in old people. Now, as far as giving this to younger folks, it doesn't seem to have anywhere near as much efficacy. Like anything else, there's still research ongoing in it, but I personally think HMB is overblown. It's not worth your dollar for dollar. Boron is just the wonderful micronutrient mineral, which it might help with increasing testosterone if you already happen to have low testosterone and typically you're older. Now let's talk about the world's favorite drug to abuse. Do any of you guys know what caffeine actually does in nature? What caffeine does in nature? What does caffeine do in nature, guys? Somebody give me a guess. Give me something. John, what do you mean by that?
I was thinking like maybe a herbivory, like like plants use it, like if animals were to eat it, it would like potentially hurt or keep them from eating it.
Absolutely, man. Good job. Caffeine is an actual natural pesticide. When insects ingest caffeine, they literally can't breathe and they choke to death. Their spiracles where they breathe in their abdomen actually stay shut, so they're not able to bring air in. So yeah, that's literally caffeine's function. We then, because we're sick MFers, we breed plants to make more of it so we can ingest it because we like how it makes us feel. But humans are going to do drugs no matter what we try and do, but that's another story entirely. Caffeine works. It helps with endurance exercise. It helps with maximal exercise, helps with supermaximal exercise. Now, it's the dosage that gets us into issues. The key is, like anything else, it's usually going to be a sweet spot between 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body mass. It's going to have a positive effect even on our cognitive functioning, which I'm sure all of you guys have encountered that like to use it. You do become habituated to it, meaning longer periods of time, eventually you're going to need more and more caffeine to have the same effect. It is going to work in both your central nervous system and then a little bit in the periphery. Caffeine versus coffee. Caffeine itself, like the pure caffeine anhydrous pills, have slightly different metabolic effects than taking something like coffee, because then it's in an herbal, plus you got 3-O-bromide and a couple other caffeine analogs as well in it. And obviously too much caffeine, we're talking about anxiety, we're talking about issues with, shall we say, diarrhea or otherwise. We've got nervousness. And caffeine has a half-life. Usually it's about 4 hours or so, or 4 to 8 hours. It depends on genetics. Some people are faster metabolizers of caffeine than others. And that'll obviously throw off sleep. And if you're off sleep, congratulations. Now you're going to have a harder time recovering because you're not sleeping as well. And it can become kind of a bit of a feed-forward mechanism. But caffeine is awesome. It's a great acute thing to use. The key is, once again, is that habituation. As you become more and more used to it, as you become habituated to it, you need more and more caffeine to have the same effect. So you need to be careful to not effectively be pounding down caffeine all the time, or you're going to find yourself in a situation where it's not doing anything for you anymore. Now, carnitine is interesting because that's going to go ahead and be, once again, the component for getting fatty acids into our body. Now, our muscle levels are way higher than our blood levels. And then notice, guys, it's going to be that carnitine, the CAT1, CAT2 transfer system that's going to get those fatty acids in the mitochondria. In theory, it might help a little bit with fatty acid metabolism, but it's not going to be a major method to increase performance. Choline, as in acetylcholine, it works as a prerequisite, obviously, for certain neurotransmitters, so it's important for nervous system function. Acetylcholine has some positive effects on mood and seeming like depressive symptoms and otherwise. Alpha glycerophosphocholone, alpha GPC, has potential issue or abilities to increase power output when taken acutely, but it hasn't shown up in much more than a couple abstracts. Chromium, as in the micromineral, specifically chromium picolinate, in theory helps a little bit with insulin sensitivity, but it's not going to be anything that's making a massive difference. Coenzyme Q10, you guys have probably seen that recently for positive effects on heart. It's usually marketed to older people. It's just another antioxidant. It might have a slight positive effect on general overall health and circulation, but it's more so to older individuals, not going to really help you guys at your current age. But let's talk creatine. Creatine's freaking awesome. So creatine is not just in your muscles, but it's also in your nervous system, as well as in your gonads and a couple other spots. Now, it's obviously really useful for that shortest of all energy systems. And this is something you need to take chronically, because we need to actually increase our intramuscular creatine levels, which does take time. you're typically looking at somewhere 3 to 6 is maybe as high as 10 grams per day, but 10 is pretty rare. That's where you're a pretty darn big human in the first place. The 3 is probably going to be more than adequate for a lot of you folks. 5 if you're closer to my body weight. I can't remember the exact milligram dosage per kilogram of body mass. That would definitely help. I think it might be something like, it's like 45 milligrams per kilogram body mass, if you're looking for doing the math on it. Now, it's really useful for obviously things that are going to tap into your ATP PCR system. It is going to cause water retention, and there is individual response to it. So some folks get more out of creatine than others. That's just kind of the nature of how individuals respond. In fact, over here, if you guys see this graph, you see how some folks get a major uptick in intramuscular creatine levels. Others barely get much of a change at all. So it doesn't really help too much with endurance performance, but it does seem to have a positive effect on resistance training. And this could be due to increase in fluid levels inside of the cells, which is going to improve leverages, which is improving strength, obviously a little bit more with energy. And as far as the safety of it, it doesn't really have any negative effects on performance or health unless you already have a pre-existing kidney problem, which, to be fair, it's something like 7+% of the US population has a kidney issue underlying. So it's worth, checking with a doctor and make sure you're healthy enough in the first place. But this is one of those, caffeine and creatine, dollar for dollar, are your best supplements as far as actually having an effect on performance, and obviously how much money you're having to invest on the front side. So dehydroepiandrosterone, this is DHEA. This is a precursor to testosterone. Doesn't really seem to have much effect on lean mass or performance. It also is a precursor to estrogen and estradiol, not as much as pregnenolone, but if you're feeling a little low on precursors to your sex hormones, you can try it. Not really worth the energy. Fish oil is interesting because when we're talking about DHA, DPA is the omega-3 essential middle step between EPA and DHA. EPA, remember, that's more for being anti-inflammation throughout the body. DHA is more for your nervous system. In theory, the phospholipids is better just because it's more bioavailable, and specifically if you're doing it from like krill, salmon roe, or even algae-based omega-3 fatty acids, that's probably going to be your best bet. And this is another thing to just take chronically. Mind you, if you're eating a diet that you're eating a lot of fish, grass, or wild game and otherwise, you're already doing pretty good here. But if you're doing a lot of McMurdering your GI and otherwise, it's not the worst hedge to have for possibly decreasing risk of negative health outcomes. So ginseng is interesting because it comes from kind of Ayurvedic medicine, a lot more like Eastern, as a way to improve general overall and neurological health. The research on there is kind of wishy-washy. It comes and goes a little bit on both sides. It's an herb that can be very expensive when you're getting it in higher qualities. Maybe it might have some components in it that do have some efficacy, but we just need more research. So we touched on glycerol before. This is that backbone of the triglycerides, and it's not just a fuel source, but it also helps with helping the body retain more water. So this is something to play around with if you know you're going to be going hard in the paint in hot weather. Inosine actually is effectively a vitamin that's why notice the B vitamins don't count up perfectly to 12, because it turns out it's not as necessary as we once thought it was. It does have some function in the body and potentially have some positive effects on just overall muscle relaxation, but it's by no means necessary. Now, lactate salts and polylactates is interesting because remember, lactate is a fuel source. So if you can take in lactate in oral form, specifically when we're doing aerobic style exercise and otherwise, that's another energy source that uses a different transporter than glucose and fructose, like we've talked about before in peri-workout nutrition for carbohydrates. So it might be efficacious to take in lactate while you're exercising, but this is another area we still need more research before we can make long sweeping statements. Lecithin, like soy lecithin and otherwise, might have some positive effects on overall your blood biomarkers. So we're talking about lipids and otherwise. Some people would argue it helps with performance. The research isn't there either. MCT oils, as much as they try to tell you and sell you on bulletproof coffee and otherwise for how it's going to allow you to solve all the problems and have all the brain power, research really isn't there yet. Now, it does allow you to use a little bit as fuel when exercising. It doesn't really increase exercise performance. Pangamic acid, notice B15, might help some general health issues. Not need to take in eating a diet with fruits and vegetables. You probably get it anyways. It's wild. Phosphatidylserine is interesting in that it supposedly helps a little bit with decreasing cortisol production and a little bit with neurological health. It's another thing you're going to get if you're doing enough. It's actually like soy-based is usually where it's derived. But it is just a slight modification of the amino acid serine. And you're only talking about a couple hundred milligrams to have this effect. You do see it in some pre-workouts and otherwise. Now, phosphorus, remember guys, it's going to be important for obviously energy, aka ATP. Now, like anything else, yeah, it's a mineral. It's also going to be incorporated in our bones too much. But as far as supplementation here, it doesn't really seem to have any major effects. Pyruvate, remember we're talking about what we're getting right before we go into acetyl-CoA. It's something you can supplement with, but doesn't seem to have any really major positive effect on energy production in the cell. Like anything else, it's just another nutrient you can take in. Doesn't really give any special benefits. Sodium bicarbonate is fascinating because it is a useful means to actually increase performance, because what it's allowing us to do, where beta-alanine is going to help us improve our buffering capacity in our muscles, sodium bicarbonate is going to help us improve our buffering components in our blood. So it's really good for doing things like 400 meter, 800 meter, things that are really hard anaerobic work. You can supplement with this, and typically, or the best method I've seen recently is to do smaller dosages, building it up in like the 24 to 48 hours before your race to help increase performance. If you try to do a large bolus, which does work, and notice it seems to be, the major threshold seems to be around like 3 milligrams per, or 3 grams per kilogram of body mass. So you got to take in a lot of it. The issue with it is really hard on your GI and is a potent laxative. So not only are you going to potentially vomit, because if you think about back in the day of the people doing the volcano science experiment of essentially vinegar and baking soda, well, sodium bicarbonate literally is baking soda. And you put that into your stomach, which is highly acidic. So if you do a big bolus of it, you're having that volcano go off in your own gut, which is going to be pretty darn uncomfortable. Sodium citrate is, in theory, a not as aggressive form of sodium bicarbonate to help with that buffering capacity. Same type thing that you can supplement with it. It doesn't really seem to have a big effect. Vanadium, which is another micromineral, might help a little bit with glucose metabolism and avoidance of diabetes, but I wouldn't really suggest using it. And wheat germ oil is really just fat. It's not really that great, but it was popularized by lifters back in the, probably 60s, 70s, kind of like they used to do desiccated liver tabs a lot as well from cows. That was probably better because it'd be really high in a number of vitamins and minerals, but it's not going to have any special thing. At the end of the day, guys, just trying to use a magic bullet to help with things. So one thing to keep in mind, guys, is when it comes to nutritional supplements, what's on the label doesn't always have to match what's inside the bottle. That's because effectively they can put and make those claims on the bottle for anything they want. And unless they're going to be actually hauled in by the FDA for breaking that rule, you can be taking some things you're not aware of. Now, there's a number of different issues that you have. The first is what's known as fairy dusting. Fairy dusting is when you'll see proprietary blend. And so it's this laundry list of a bunch of different supplements that happen to be effectively, like it has all these different supplements in there. Well, when it does proprietary blend, they're not giving you how many milligrams of each of the individual ingredients. Instead, they're saying all these things are in there. Now, that literally means the actual ingredients, the actual components inside the actual supplements that are going to help your performance could be in such low dosages, they're not going to have an effect. And trust me, this happens quite frequently when it comes to supplementation. So when you see proprietary blend, you should immediately be nervous because we can have some things in there that are not having anywhere near the effect that they're claiming they do. The other is off-label, and this is a really awesome one, unless you got to pass a drug test, in that some companies will put a little extra something, aka put some oral anabolics or some other real powerful drugs into their actual supplements that they're selling. And then whenever you go and buy it, you're like, oh my God, I got so strong and blah, blah, blah. And turns out, well, it's because you were taking anabolics that were in that supplement. And one of the first ones supposedly to do this was what's known as Ultimate Orange, which supposedly had Anavar, which is a potent oral anabolic specifically for really increasing aggression and effectively, power and performance. So these people took this pre-workout that also had ephedra, caffeine, and a bunch of other things. It's probably one of the first big, pre-workouts. And it turns out they were taking a lot more than they thought. And then when the second round came around, when the FDA was starting to go check on them, they just don't put the Anavar in the second round. So you've already got people that are into your product and they're going to buy it because they had these great effects. However, at the same time, congratulations. Now, when they go looking for it, they can't find it because it's no longer in there. So any questions, comments, concerns about nutritional supplements before we're going to have you guys do your first small group activity of the night?
Yeah, Dr. Lane, I had a question about going back to the fish oil. I know you can get omega-3s from eggs. Is it the same thing or is it different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. And then my second question was, I've noticed that a lot of pre-workouts have like a crap ton of vitamin B. Is there a reason for that?
Niacin flushing. So you do a lot of B vitamins, causes your face to turn red and causes you to kind of feel a little bit of that tingling in your face, kind of like beta-alanine. When people do a lot of beta-alanine, you're like, oh, my face is tingling, my pre-workout's working. No, it's not. That's paresthesia. It's a side effect of taking too much beta-alanine at once. That beta-alanine is not having the effect in your muscles yet because it has combined with histidine to make carnosine, and that's happening probably not when you're lifting weights. So bros are easy to fool into thinking they're taking things that are having a major effect. Loaded with B vitamins, throw in a giant hit of beta-alanine. I'm like, oh my God, I feel so ramped up. Like, yeah, buddy, it's because my supplement works so well. And then you put a crap ton of caffeine. Go figure. Everybody's going to feel like they're ready to rip the head off a lion. But I'm personally not a big proponent of pre-workouts. Not that I wasn't an addict at one point myself, just for the simple fact of if you can't talk yourself into lifting the weights, you probably shouldn't be lifting them in the first place.
Usually if someone's going to take a pre-workout or like, let's say they're going to take creatine, should you take it before? And if you have to take it before, how long before you lift?
So creatine, in order to actually hit that point where you're saturated, it's going to typically take about, if you do loading, which is going to be like 10 to 20 grams a day, which is a pretty darn big load of creatine, you'll maximize your intracellular creatine levels in effectively about, gosh, it's probably gonna take about a week. Now, if you do the lower dose, which is the maintenance dose as well, which is that like 2 to 6 grams, depending on how big you are, guys, that one, you're going to go ahead and max out your creatine levels in about a month. So, but then you just maintain that intake for as long as you want. That's a good question. Sorry for not covering that earlier. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit of the wild stuff of a little bit of the different drugs we can find out there and potential usefulness of them. So right now, guys, I've got the breakout rooms kind of set up. Are you guys on your end able to see like who you'll be in the breakout room with?
No,
No, pre-workouts can actually work, but they're not going to have anywhere near as a big effect as you want. And then Chris, quite frequently it's an intentional contamination. And then sometimes it's on accident, and that's another problem entirely. That's why a lot of places like, your bigger companies will pay to have third-party testing to make sure that like what's on the label matches what's inside the bottle. Because imagine this, GNC doesn't actually make any of their own products. They buy this ingredient from this group, buy this ingredients from this group, this from these people, these from these people, and then they have another group that combines them all into, whatever bottle they want, slaps the label on it, and then sends it out. Now, let's say there's a factory somewhere that makes peanut butter flavoring the night before using real peanut butter, using real peanuts. The next day, they make chocolate flavoring using the exact same belts, same machines and everything, but they don't thoroughly clean the machines before they start making that peanut butter flavoring. So, before they start making the chocolate flavoring. So now part of that chocolate flavoring has been contaminated with peanuts. You put that in a protein powder. The person bought chocolate. On the label, it doesn't say anything about, made in a place with nuts or blah, blah, blah. And then they have a major allergic reaction to your supplement. You're looking at a potentially $1 million plus lawsuits on your hand. So you pay for the third-party testing. So the ones that aren't doing that, they're typically the ones that are, let's just say, they're a little bit more comfortable with working in the gray areas of the law. And yeah, Kennedy, like I said, they're not fake. They just aren't as effective as people would think. Well, they are effective in certain ways. It's mostly just caffeine. But if you look at the price of the caffeine, you're paying a lot of money for just the one ingredient that actually works, and the others that are there to make people feel like something's happening. So, but I apologize, Alex. Can you see who you guys are going to be in a group with?
I was gonna say no. We usually just find out until we get into the actual group.
Okay, well, I'm going to hit pause so I don't out all of you guys. I guess I can use probably first names, but I'll pause anyways. We'll go ahead and re-hit record. When I say proprietary blend, guys, notice this over here. It's 19,445.85 milligrams. Now, what's interesting when you guys look up at this and you see that many milligrams, what do we immediately convert that over into?
Freedom units. No, I just love that you say that. In grams.
Yeah, so it's 19 almost and a half grams, which is like, not even a full scoop of protein powder. Okay, cool. What's the first ingredient?
Sugar.
Bingo. So it's probably 19.4 grams of sugar. And the next 45 would be creatine, beta-alanine, taurine, L-glutamine, tyrosine, L-pyroglutamic acid, citrulline, malate, glycine, creatinine, and sumaroot extract, papain, L-arginine, AKG, sumaroot, fruit punch, strawberry, mango, blueberry, papaya, pineapple. Oh, for flavorings. Another form of creatine, salt with citrate. Yeah, so therein lies the problem, guys. You can hide away from it. Now, let's go ahead and put in your guys' answers. Chris, I noticed you say part 1. Where's part 2? Perfect. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it's also, like I said before, with prohormones, they're quite hard on the liver. CBD is fascinating because it's probably the ingredient that's become the most popular in the shortest period of time of any supplement ever. But the research out there, we still got a long ways before we're going to have any ability to really have long, like arcing effects that we can say are definitely going on. Because I like how things that helps, like anxiety, side effects, anxiety. Wait, what? Helps with mood, changes in mood. Wait, what? So there's still a lot more research that needs to be done in that area. Ostarine, which is a selective androgen receptor mediator, that's what SARM stands for. It's interesting in that it might have some positive effects with effectively giving the effects of testosterone without all the side effects, but it doesn't really seem to help like people would argue it does. I would personally stay away from SARMs simply because this is very much so in its infancy, but if it comes down the pipe to be useful, that could be far more interesting. Now, racetams are actually a class of drugs that are nootropics, and they're legally available in a lot of other places in the world. It can definitely have an effect on effectively improving cognition and performance academically and also even sport performance. But like anything else, it can also be dangerous, especially when we're using high amounts. And yeah, peptides, we're looking more for like growth peptides, not as in collagen-based peptides, guys. So it's gonna be taking things like IGF-1 and growth hormone analogs, which do have potential positive effects on, you know, recovery and performance, but also they cause hypertrophy of all your tissues, including your internal organs. So that's not exactly something that a lot of people are looking for, is to have like massively jacked livers and large intestines. So good job though, guys. Good job. Any questions about this stuff? No questions before we head on to the next component? Trying to get this so that it'll hopefully get a little bit bigger so you guys can read it. There we go. So I put these slides online. People are going to be able to read them. All right. You know, this is just a basic rundown of the same thing. Okay. All right, guys, so let's talk about really nutrition and our different types of training adaptations we're looking for. So what we're really talking about when we're working with anybody is, remember, we have the stimulus, we have then the adaptation that's going to, and then the response. So when we do hard training, we are going to accumulate fatigue, which is going to lower performance, but we're also increasing our fitness. Now, the blue line is actually our performance. So we give ourselves enough time, as fatigue is going to dissipate far faster than fitness. Overall performance is going to go ahead and come up. As you guys are pretty aware of, since we've covered it extensively in exercise physiology, which is we're going to adapt specifically to the demands that are placed upon our body. It makes perfect sense. We're going to get better at the things that we're doing frequently. Now, the way this is going to occur is through what's known as signal transduction pathways, which is effectively the equivalent of a Rube Goldberg machine. So if you have any questions about that, just go ahead and look up effectively any of the OK Go music videos, but effectively think of it like dominoes. The first one falls, and then it's going to cause the next one, which is going to cause the next one, to cause the next one. So what we effectively have is training itself through the signal of the stretch on the muscle, calcium being released, phosphorylation of AMPK, mTOR, and other proteins. We're then going to eventually get DNA transcription, which is then going to be translated into the proteins we actually need. And then we have more of those proteins in our cells doing their jobs. So the starting of a signal cascade is going to be effectively what's known as the primary signal. And so notice stretch or tension on the muscle is going to cause this. calcium levels are going to cause this, and then changes in energy balance, meaning we've got less energy available inside of the cell. So this mechanical stress is in turn going to activate certain protein kinases, known as kinase X, which is then going to cause translation and the effects of transcription. So we're making that messenger RNA, but we're also making those proteins. And that in turn is going to cause changes in our DNA expression, which is going to give us the adaptation we want. So what we have here is the signaling effects from doing resistance training compared to doing distance running. Now, resistance training is going to cause the activation of what's known as the mechanistic target of rapamycin. This in turn is going to cause the activation of DNA expression to create more of those proteins inside of your cells related to strength and power performance. So more actin, more myosin, more enzymes related to anaerobic glycolysis, and even things like creatine kinase. Whereas when we're talking about aerobic exercise, well, now we're going to be activating what's known as AMPK, and in turn, we're also going to get an increase in what's known as PGC1 alpha. PGC1 alpha is interesting because it's actually going to cause us to build more mitochondria so that we're going to effectively be more aerobically capable, and it's going to have us focusing on trying to replenish those energy levels inside of the cell by increasing glycogen levels and effectively, getting ourselves back to homeostasis as quickly as we can. So we then have these secondary signals that are going to effectively be occurring through, obviously, that wonderful flow chart we talked about. So when it comes to exercise, and we're talking about aerobic performance, we're then going to get TGF beta activating protein kinase B, which is really just AKT, and calcium MK kinase activated, which in turn are all going to influence AMPK. AMPK is going to inhibit the mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is why you kind of have the crossover effect, meaning aerobic training is going to interfere with the effects of resistance training, but you don't see anywhere near the same effect from resistance training on aerobic performance. Now, this in turn is going to have us not making as much glycogen, not making really new glucose, but really breaking down things for energy. And then notice we're going to be activating PGC1 alpha, which in turn is going to get us to increase our mitochondrial number. Now, this secondary signals, this is going to take a couple hours, okay? On the other side of this, we've got the effects from training. So insulin-like growth factor 1 or mechano growth factor or muscle growth factor. This in turn is going to activate the insulin receptor substrate, which is going to phosphorylate phosphoinositol 3 kinase. So notice there's your inosine in there, which is going to in turn activate protein kinase B, aka AKT, which is going to inhibit FOXO, which is going to be in MRF-box, which are both related to protein degradation inside of the nucleus. It's going to also inhibit tumor sclerotic proteins 1 and 2, along with GCK3 beta. And this in turn is going to cause mTOR to go into both its Richter and Raptor interfaces. And Raptor is the one that's going to activate protein 70S6 kinase and 4E-BP1 eukaryotic initiating factor 4E, or binding protein 1. It's going to allow it to release. And this in turn is going to give us that translation we're looking for. Do you need to memorize any of those flowcharts? No. I want you to remember AMPK is important for low energy levels in the state or in the cell. PGC1 alpha is important for mitochondrial biogenesis, and mTOR is important for building muscle. So this primary signal, notice it's just going to take a number of seconds, maybe a couple of minutes. The signaling cascade itself is going to take minutes into hours, maybe 2 or 3. Then the transcription or translation is going to last for potentially days, and protein synthesis is probably all going to be resolved from a hard training session somewhere between probably 2 to 4 days for the most part. Now, in general, what is nutrition doing when it comes to our training adaptations? Well, turns out it's going to help with performance or cause some of these signals to become bigger, so to speak. So right when we're looking at these graphs, what we're talking about is that we've got higher glycogen when we start in the first place, and then effectively go through training, and then obviously try it again after training for a long period of time, if we do it in more of a low glycogen state, we're going to, by nature of the beast, have to get better at utilizing fats as fuel, which is going to give us a bit of an advantage when it comes to, once again, how long we can maintain. This is not the same thing as racing a time trial, but this is part of the argument where you want to train naturally on occasion with lower glycogen levels and then compete with high glycogen levels, because it's going to be much, much easier for you to go ahead and have the effects you want. Because notice the citrate synthase, which is going to be important for the Krebs cycle, and same thing with HAD, is going to have a much greater positive uptick from these training effects than was happening in the higher glycogen levels. Now, when it comes to these different training effects, or these effects on training, as far as training without breakfast to go do exercise, it's not really going to uptake or improve your performance that much. If anything, you know, some folks might perform a little bit worse because they don't have anything in them. Other folks, they might get a little more out of it, but it's not going to make that big of a difference. Now, carbohydrate intake during exercise is going to make it a little bit less stressful in the body. So this is a potential thing to do if you're trying to maximize muscle mass, to take in carbs while you're exercising so you don't get as much AMPK activation. Whereas if you are trying to get better aerobic activation, then you should actually try to not take in as much carbohydrate when you happen to be exercising. Now, leucine is going to be that major amino acid that's important for activating the mechanistic target of rapamycin, which it's pros and cons. Pros because obviously you do activate it, but con because just because the factor is on doesn't mean you actually have enough bricks, steel, and mortar to build anything with it. So it's not just taking in the branched chain amino acids, but it's also taking in your essential acids with it so you can actually do something with it. And we've talked before about antioxidants, and taking in too many of them will effectively blunt your body's own ability at improving its ability to deal with oxidants or reactive oxidative species. But if you're once again trying to make the training less stressful, that can obviously be pretty useful. And then actually NSAIDs, so non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, ibuprofen and otherwise, actually have been shown to have a decrease effect on overall hypertrophy, because literally you don't have as much aggressive cellular signaling because you're not encountering as much damage as you would have otherwise from the work you're doing. And then finally, what we're really looking for here, guys, is making sure that we're applying enough stimulus so the body can overcome it and recover, and then repeat that cycle again. So we're actively trying to avoid doing is obviously getting ourselves into a state of overtraining. So we're looking to, yes, maybe on occasion overreach where we're deplenishing glycogen, but we're then going to go ahead and do a real high carbohydrate intake. So we're going to get that super compensation, kind of like we talked about in the carbohydrate part of what we're going to do with essentially timing carbs to get that super maximization of it. No, not super maximization, super compensation of it. Sorry about that. Glutamine may or may not have a bit of effect on improving your immune system whenever you happen to be doing excessively stressful training, but that's not really a good long-term strategy to go ahead and try to do for folks for effectively trying to enhance their performance. And then branched chain amino acids. Oh, cool. Also, or can potentially have that effect of helping us avoid losing lean mass when we're going on through. But remembering, guys, at the end of the day, we're really talking about signaling cascades. So I'm going to put you guys in groups once more. And remember those three different key systems that we're talking about is I want you guys to, one group is going to talk about AMPK and its signaling cascade. So that'll be, sorry. Spelling PGC1 alpha. So what starts the signaling cascade? Does this make sense to you guys? And when I say Rube Goldberg machine, are you guys familiar with that? Okay, so I'm going to, actually, hold on, I can just pause share. I don't want you guys to see. Well, you've already seen the embarrassing nature of how many tabs I have open in my computer. But effectively, where are you? Yeah, I can definitely. Okay. A Rube Goldberg machine is where one thing is going to signal another thing to happen, and it's going to keep going accordingly. Yeah, so think about the game Mousetrap. And this entire music video is one take. All right. Have I bored you guys enough with this insanity, or you guys want to keep watching this? And I don't even know if you guys can hear a single bit of the song.
No, we can't hear anything.
Oh, so this is even more awkward. You're staring at me, staring at a music video. Okay, screw it. We're almost to the end. So that's Rube Goldberg machine. You're welcome. So whenever you guys are ready, those rooms are going to be open. It is currently 7:14. Plan on coming back at about 7:25. If you guys are struggling, do the raise your hand thing and I will come join your group to help you guys work your way through it. What's up, party people? Oh, hour. Can you get down on that connection? Sometimes it's stupid. All right, guys. Do you guys need more time? I thought more of you guys would have jumped out of the groups faster than that. Did you guys not feel like you had enough for that?
No.
We felt like we had a hard time finding information.
Same.
Okay. Okay. So do you guys want to try to go through it and I can hop in, or you guys would prefer to have some more time and we'll come back and say, I don't know, how many more minutes do you guys want?
I don't know if more time would help us. I think we just couldn't
It's okay.
find anything.
It's okay. Put out there what you guys got and we will work through it together. Ooh, Cert Wong, getting some sirtuins in there. I like it. Import group, you guys gonna be able to put something out there, or how's that coming?
I'm currently typing something out right now, but we didn't get much along the lines of what you wanted us to find. We were having trouble finding stuff.
It's okay, guys. Cellular signaling is not exactly the easiest thing to understand. And obviously our goal is to, work our way through it and hopefully we'll be able to apply our knowledge. So notice and you guys keep working on it, and I will definitely help you guys out with MDOR because I've literally imaged it and researched it myself. So notice with AMPK, it is from endurance exercise. Now, the lot and similar to PGC1 alpha, but we'll get there. So what we're going to do is we're getting this effect because we're having low ATP levels and higher ADP, ANP levels. So if we really want this, great job there, guys, AMP group. If you're really trying to get those levels as high as possible, we want to drive the cell into a low energy state. Now, the way that we can help this along is by purposefully keeping glucose intake lower. So that way we're naturally not going to have as much energy available anaerobically or obviously higher speeds aerobically. So this is going to allow us to make that effectively occur. The cascade for that, guys, we're really talking about a couple hours. We're not talking about a long period of time. And like anything else, if we are to take in calories immediately post-workout, that's not necessarily going to stop the signaling that we've already had occur. So that shouldn't be something that we're afraid that like, oh God, we ate and now we're going to turn it off. Now, I do like with the PGC1 alpha, you guys bring out the fact that it's also related to cellular energy and also cold exposure. So go running in the freaking cold. But what's going to occur is, remember guys, when it's cold outside, we don't get as good a blood flow to our periphery, which means we don't do as good of a job of freeing up fatty acids to utilize as fuel. And so since we have to utilize more carbohydrates as fuel and we're burning through energy at a faster rate, congratulations. Now we're going to go ahead and increase our amount of mitochondria. So we're going to be able to do that more aerobically than anaerobically. So same type situation where we almost want to have ourselves in more of a low energy state. Mind you, because this is going to be turning on cellular signaling to increase glycogen stores, preferential improvement in aerobic enzymes and mitochondria levels eventually, because AMPK is going to signal on PGC1 alpha. We want to make sure we're still taking enough calories and not just calories, but carbohydrates and protein post-workout so we can make that happen. Now, are you pretty close, Brent?
I'm about to post something in.
Go for it, bud. If you're wrong, we will give you so much trouble about it. And remember, Alex is the grad student in your group, so it's his fault. It's okay, guys, that's okay. So are you guys able to read what I put in there? Brent, you guys did a good job. mTOR is going to be really important for protein synthesis and really talk about increasing cellular size. And so mTOR gets a bad rap because mTOR will go out of control in cancer, meaning having huge amounts of mTOR activation is great in your muscles, but not so much in a lot of other cells in your body, because that's usually when, once again, we've got a cancer that's a tumor that's growing or potentially even metastasizing. And now we're getting into some issues with like snare protein. Otherwise, I'm too many proteins and I'm not trying to freak you guys out. So by having a higher protein and carbohydrate intake, because leucine itself is going to activate it, as will it's affected, it's going to also be signaled on by insulin itself. So by making sure we're taking in carbohydrates and protein, specifically, this is going to be that pre-exercise or during exercise in order so we're going to be able to enhance its activation. And that in turn, in theory, if we've got that higher calorie state, we're also not going to be activating AMPK as much. And we're going to go ahead and have a little bit more of an anabolic effect from the work we're doing. So we talked about a couple different energy systems, why they're important, or sorry, cellular signaling cascades, why they're important, and how they're effectively working for us. So these are the actual mechanisms that are driving the physical changes that we're going to get from training, and how effectively choices we make are going to positively influence or, inhibit the changes we would have occurring otherwise. So we've covered a lot of ground talking about supplementation. Really, caffeine, creatine are the major ones that work, and then understanding a little bit about ones that might be selectively important in certain areas. We didn't talk about citrulline malate. That's one that also helps with vasodilation. Beetroot juice and like nitrates and nitrites can possibly also be advantageous for increasing blood flow, which in turn is going to increase aerobic capacity, especially in folks that are older and or untrained. Seems to have a bigger effect. Trained people don't get as much out of it. And we talked about the major energy or major cellular signaling pathways that I think are worth you guys understanding. Do you guys have any other questions, comments, concerns, anything else about the class, expectations, and otherwise that you would like me to go ahead and touch upon before we call it a night?
I just had a quick question about the research paper that's due tomorrow.
Yeah, what's up?
I just wanted to clarify, are we taking from like the literature review, are we just adding on to that, or are we taking part of the literature review and like adding it as like our own source? Does that make sense?
Yeah, think of it as you're almost kind of starting over from the beginning. You're creating your own review. Now use that first article that you read, since you should be still going in the same area, but now you're writing your own review. So you're not giving me effectively a summary of one article. You're writing your review of all 10 of those articles and how, once we synthesize all that information, we're getting that information to flow together and create a bit of a narrative where we're learning more about, like we talked about in the beginning of the supplementation presentation tonight, of, okay, what are the contexts that your area works in? What are the populations it does work in? What are the populations it doesn't work in? What do we know? What do we not know about it? And kind of going through it critically that way. Does that make sense to you, Abby?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
May I ask a question about the project too?
Yeah, no kidding. What's up?
When do grad students do the presentation? I think you said that we are just submitting as a already done presentation, but I didn't want to miss where I was supposed to do that.
Presentations are going to be the final week of class, which is, for us, it's 2 weeks from now.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. So the basic idea, because I know Alex is here as well, we're missing one of the other graduate students, but the basic thing that you guys are going to do effectively is you guys are going to record effectively. Our goal is like a 3-minute presentation of your research. So we're hitting the major points, like this is what it is. This is when we should care about it. This is when we should not care about it. Do you have any questions? So I don't want you guys to feel like you've got to give a massive, you know, lecture over it. I don't want you guys to feel like we got to put together a long presentation, but I want you guys to take the information you have, once again, synthesize it together, think about where it works, where it doesn't, what are the contexts, what are the populations, etc., and give the rest of the class effectively the key points that they need to understand. Now, obviously, we can only simplify certain things so far, but I want you guys to try to simplify the information to the best of your ability. So, rock and roll. Any other questions, comments, concerns before we call it a night, guys? All right. Seeing as how there are none, you guys stay safe out there. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you guys next week. We're getting to the end of the line. And yeah, hopefully you guys are having a bit of fun with it. And I will see you guys then. If you have any questions in the interim, you know how to get a hold of me. Don't hesitate to email, but stay safe out there. Have a great night. Bye-bye.